All right, everybody, we will be getting started in just a moment. So again, I want to let you know some housekeeping off the top. So first this is the first webinar in our College Readiness and Management series. So there will be more webinars coming up after this. So we will be sending all of that information to you so you can register as you would like to. And then additionally, if you do have any questions throughout the presentation, that is totally fine. We do have both a chat and a question box for you to drop those questions in. At the very end of the presentation, we will start to go through those and answer some questions. So again, if at any point you have any questions or want to learn more, just let us know and we can go ahead and do that at the end of the presentation. Otherwise, I wanted to thank everybody for joining us today. As I mentioned, I am so excited to be hosting the first webinar in our College Readiness and Management series. Today, my wonderful colleagues, Sarah Snyder and Henry Price, will be guiding you through the difficult college decision process. Now, it's something that we all kind of have to grapple with, especially as adult learners, and they're going to help kickstart that internal discussion of why you might be thinking about going back to college, how you may go about doing that, and what your own priorities are and how to juggle all of that. So I will go ahead and kick it off to Henry and Sarah. Please introduce yourself.
Thank you, Maxine. Welcome everyone to our Navigating the College Decision webinar. We are going to go over a whole lot of stuff here, so I hope you're ready. We're going to walk through the whole college decision experience, from decision making all the way through graduation and beyond through this series. So navigating college admissions is going to be coming up next, where you're going to learn more about taking that next step if college is indeed the right course for you. You'll get all kinds of information from how the admission process works to where you can find information about financing college. Then we'll take you through the college experience itself, showing you where you can find the help you need, effectively manage your workload, work in teams, and balance all your priorities. And then last, in our final session of the series, we'll give you resources for moving past college, how to take what you've learned and earned and use it to your advantage in meeting your personal goals. So we're going to start it all off, though, with that all-important first step of navigating the college decision. Our objectives for today are to dispel common myths around returning to school as an adult, to acknowledge the decision you have ahead of you, to learn what and where to research in making that decision, and to apply the research that you do and some decision making to sample careers so you can get a feel for what it would look like. I do want to provide one clarification before we get started. Henry and I and Tutor.com have no vested interest in your decision about whether to go to college or not. Throughout this webinar, we aim to provide you with decision-making tools, but we won't be making decisions for you or telling you which decision is best. This is going to be a lot of opportunity for self-reflection and suggestions about which direction your reflection might be leading you, but there are no absolutes here. So with that said, let's start with a look at some common myths and misconceptions about adult students. Our first stop today is to look at those myths around adult students returning to college. As every myth has some basis in truth, you'll see that some of these may be true in some cases or for some students, but none of them are accurate blanket statements. As we go through each myth, I'd like you to reflect on whether you agree or disagree with what the myth is saying when you apply it to your own personal situation. This should help you evaluate what you really believe to be true and perhaps identify some inaccurate beliefs or some areas where your assumptions need some research. Here's our first myth. Do you agree or disagree? The only way to advance in my career is to go back to college. Give you a minute to think about that. As I mentioned, this may be true for some people, but it is not blanketly true for all people. Are you a nurse who wants to be a doctor? Chances are this is true, and the only way to get there is more school. Are you a line cook and you want to be a head chef? It's entirely possible that going back to school is not the only way to advance your career, as the culinary industry often accepts experience in place of education. Let's look at our next myth. I'm too old to go back to college. So a couple of years ago, Kiplinger magazine highlighted the story of a man named Jim Kruger who had dropped out of college many years ago. Following retirement, he went back to school and he's worked his way up to earning his PhD at age 72. In 2016, Sadie Cameron, who lives in Nova Scotia, earned her college degree at age 98. As they say, age is just a number. So if you have the drive and dedication, age really shouldn't be a concern in your decision-making process. Our next myth to consider: my previous coursework won't count. It's expired or irrelevant. Give you a minute. Here again is another myth that might hold true for some people. Depending on the requirements of the school and the degree program that you choose, it is possible that previous coursework won't count. It may have been earned too long ago or be in a field that doesn't apply at all to what you are doing. My first year of college was at an unaccredited college in Florida. I'm from Colorado, and I love my seasons and my dry air. Florida was way too far from home and too hot and too humid. When I decided to return to Colorado after that first year, not a single one of my credits transferred. But I didn't let that influence my decision to essentially start over. I felt that just because my credits didn't transfer, that didn't mean I had to give up on my dream of a college degree. That drive and determination we talked about with the last question got me through. Another myth for you: going back to school is impossible because I have a family and I'm working full-time. Think about that one. I don't know anyone who will tell you that going back to college as an adult is easy. It takes a lot of hard work, time, and flexibility, but it's not impossible. Most programs have at least part-time options, if not one class at a time options. It will be easier if you have the support and cooperation of your family and employer, for sure. But having a family and a full-time job to juggle shouldn't be a prime determining factor in whether you choose to go to college. Our next myth: there are no financial resources for me as an adult student. Do you agree or disagree? Student loans are available to adult students just as they are to traditional students coming straight from high school. Additionally, some organizations make available grants specifically for returning students. Employers may offer tuition reimbursement if you complete courses relevant to your industry. In part 2 of our College Readiness and Management series, Navigating College Admissions, we talk more about what those financial aid options are. So if this is a concern that you have, I strongly recommend attending that session and learning more about what's out there for you. Even if you're still undecided about going back to school, knowing what's available to help pay for it might help you make a better decision. Another myth for you: I'll need to take or retake the ACT or SAT to get in. Just like when we talked about your previous coursework, this is going to depend a lot on the school and the program that you're interested in. This is another case where research is necessary because there's no universal answer to whether you do or don't have to take the ACT or SAT, which one you need to take, or what other requirements you need to meet to be exempt from taking it. So find out from the school what they require. Admissions counselors can be a great resource for answering that question. Last myth for you: do you agree or disagree with this one? I won't be able to find the courses I need offered at times that work with my other responsibilities. Schools today are growing more and more empathetic to the needs of the adult student. Additionally, the prevalence of online-only programs is higher now than in the past. Online programs often offer great flexibility where you can view lectures and complete engagement assignments on your own schedule. So you could feasibly do school in the middle of the night if that was what your schedule needed. Before assuming that you won't be able to find what you need, again, do your research. Maybe a different school will have more flexibility. Maybe you could switch to a different shift at work. Be careful that your assumptions are grounded in fact rather than in guesswork. So I hope you found these opportunities for reflection helpful. And next, we're going to look at some questions to ask yourself as you are making this decision about going back to college. It's a big question, right? Should you go to college? And it shouldn't be assumed that the answer is yes, you should go to college. Everyone should go to college. There's a lot of pieces to this decision. So let's look at some of the smaller questions you might want to ask that will help inform the answer to whether you should go to college. So our first one, what are your short and long-term goals for your career? I mentioned before, the line cook who wants to be head chef. Maybe the line cook also wants to own their own restaurant, and head chef is a short-term goal on the way to that long-term goal of owning the restaurant. Consider both when you're making your decision. Next one, do you have a specific career, field, or position in mind? What education is required for those? Do some research into what education is required for the career or field that you have in mind. The medical field, for example, is more likely to require specific training or certifications than the culinary field. Take the time to learn more about what it is that you want to be and what it requires to be there. Next question, what is required for advancement beyond your current position? Is it more education than you have now? If you want to stay in the same field you're in, is more education required to move to that next step? Are there organizations who will accept work experience in its place, such that you could maybe advance by changing companies? Learn not only the industry, but also the approach taken by major employers or your preferred employers in that field. Another question, is the earning potential associated with the degree I'm considering worth the incurred cost of getting it? There's no formula here because financial decisions are incredibly personal. Unless you manage to have college paid for in its entirety by someone else, you're going to incur costs along the way. Do research about earning potential for people with the degree that you're considering. Is the difference between what you make now and what you could make with that degree worth the costs that you're going to incur getting it? And again, that's a personal decision. You have to make that one for yourself. Will any alternatives be acceptable in place of a full-blown college degree? Some examples, a trade or technical school, a 2-year community college degree, a certificate program, additional work experience, maybe starting your own business. With so many alternatives to a 4-year degree, make sure you aren't spending more time and money than you need to in order to get where you want to be. Research where you can go with alternative degrees in the same field. Will they get you to the same place or a similar place that is acceptable to you? These are some great questions to think through as part of your decision-making process. But how do you interpret the answers? Let's look at some flags that might suggest you more strongly consider college or not. Here we have some indicators that could lean your decision more strongly one way or the other. You might want to lean yes or no, depending on the truth of each of these statements. So the first one, your dream job requires a higher degree than what you have. If getting where you want to be really does require more education, college might be the right answer for you. But on the flip side, if your dream job can be attained without further education, you might lean toward not pursuing college at this time. Next up, the financial investment will pay off within the time frame that is acceptable to you. If it's going to take X years to make back what you spent on your degree and you're okay with that, college might be the right answer for you. On the flip side, if the financial return on investment is not acceptably high enough for you, you're not okay with how long it's going to take to pay for itself, you might lean toward looking for other options or another industry or a cheaper way to get where you want to go. And last, you want the formal education in your field regardless of whether you can get there or of whether you can get there without it. If you want the formal education just because you do, maybe you just love school or it's important to you personally to have that degree and you're okay with all the other pieces, the time, the money, the juggling of other priorities, you might lean toward a yes. On the flip side, if this is someone else's decision, you're doing it because it's what people do, or it's just what you think is the right thing to do, you might lean toward no until you can find your internal motivation for going to school. You're unlikely to be successful if you're not doing it for some intrinsic or personal reason, something that really applies to you. We've gone through quite a few questions here and a number of considerations that play into the decision about whether to go to college as an adult. These are by no means comprehensive, but the overarching theme across any considerations I'm sure you've caught on is going to be research. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Henry, and he's going to walk you through what that looks like.
Hi, everybody, and thanks, Sarah. Yes, it is my turn, and I'm going to talk to you about how to do the research that might get you where you want to go. So there's a lot you may not know, and I'm assuming there are a lot of you here today. Some of you are going to be a little bit further along this process than others, but I'm hoping that what we look at over the next few minutes will apply to everyone. So the two big things we're going to cover in this section are how to find careers and jobs that are right for you. And again, you're going to be at different places in that question right now, and that's all right. And then once we've taken a look at that, we'll also think about finding colleges that get you to that place that you have identified. So first things first, and I'm a strong believer in beginning with the end in mind. Rather than look for colleges and see what they have to offer and maybe fitting your goals into that, let's identify your goals. And a great way to do that is actually with the US government. There's a website called the Bureau of Labor Statistics, not just a website, it's a department within the government. The Bureau of Labor Statistics site is pretty easy to memorize, bls.gov, as in Bureau Labor Statistics.gov. Type that into a browser and it will take you there. And I want to walk you through this because it is a really cool resource that a lot of Americans may not realize the government is providing for them. So let's take a look. Let's imagine you want to do some research into a particular career, and we'll pick one in just a second. This thing is a massive database, and you can explore it in a wide variety of ways. For instance, you could take a look at, in your particular region, what's going on. They've identified New England there, but you can also pick any other site, any area you would like. But for today, I'm going to identify a specific thing. Like I know I'm interested in accounting. So I type accountant in the search field, and you get a result page that looks a lot like any other search engine, but I'm going to select the first one first. And that's going to take me to the summary tab on what it means to be an accountant. Now, there's a lot going on the summary tab, and we'll get into more details in just a moment, but it is exactly what you would imagine. It tells you the basics of what an accountant is, what it pays, what the market is for accountants in the near future, and so forth and so forth. Okay, so take a look at this summary page, but then go quickly onto the What Do They Do tab. The What Do They Do tab is super, super helpful. It tells you things like all the different kinds of accountants you can be, government, management, public. It also identifies credentials that you need. A CPA, to pass the test to become a CPA is in a lot of accountants' futures, okay? So look for things on that What Do They Do page that tell you about all of that. Then you can move on to work environment. This tells you what it's like to actually be an accountant. Do you work in an office or mostly from home? Do you have really busy seasons? Accountants do have much busier seasons around tax time than other times. But what you're probably here to learn most about today is how to get there, right? So how to become one might be the tab that you spend the most time in. This is going to tell you what degree, if any, is required to pursue the career that you're interested in. It's going to tell you about certifications, in this case, the CPA, and there's much more to it than just I need to pass the CPA exam at some point. It gives you a lot more information about at what stage in your career you'll want to pursue that and what it takes to do it. One thing I really like about this tab is that it doesn't just stick to the absolute facts about the job. If you scroll down to the bottom, it also talks about qualities that you as an individual might have that are a good fit for this job. So if you took like a personality inventory and you find out you're good at certain things, is this job a good fit for that? Then you can move over to pay. And you'll see here that an accountant on average actually makes quite a bit more than the average American salary. The average American salary is roughly $45,000, but an accountant makes almost twice that, okay? And we rewound here just a little bit. I apologize for that. Going back to the pay site, an accountant makes significantly more than the average of all Americans. Now, that doesn't mean that accountants only make exactly that amount of money. This is a median, right? So a lot make more and a lot make less. Did you, for instance, know that the average American makes $45,000 and change? That's interesting information as you consider some other careers. Then you go over to Job Outlook, and this is an underrated thing to consider. How much is this particular career going to grow over the next decade or so? And it says here that the accountant job is going to grow at a pretty standard rate, like most careers, at about a 7 to 8% rate. If you were to look at other jobs, you might find that a lot more jobs in that field are becoming available over the next 10 years. You'll find that in a lot of technology careers right now. You might find it's growing much slower than other careers. So you'll want to take a look at this before you dive into your dream career. Find out realistically, when I'm done with this in a few years, what is likely to be the environment for that career. Just a quick story. I work on the Princeton review side and have for a long time, and we prep for every kind of tests. And that includes the test to get you into things like law school, the LSAT, okay? Our LSAT business is, of course, very largely dependent on how many people want to go to law school. What we learn over the years is that grad school and folks like yourselves who are thinking about going back to school as adults, when the economy turns down, think about 2008, if you remember that economic crisis, 2020, when the pandemic hit, and a lot of people were suddenly unexpectedly out of a job. Grad school and continuing college admissions skyrocket for reasons that are pretty clear, right? So we had huge interest in taking the LSAT in 2008-ish, and again in 2020-ish. And if you think about 2020 in particular, it wasn't just the pandemic, right? There were a lot of other things going on, including nationwide social justice protests, which again translates directly to people thinking about getting into careers in, you guessed it, justice, right? So once again, law school saw huge increases in applications around those events. Now, conversely, when the economy is booming, as it was in between there, such as, let's say, 2010 to 2019, we did not see nearly as many law school or overall graduate or even continuing bachelor's applications like some of you may be considering, simply because the industries were stable and people had very few external reasons to consider changing careers. Now, you may have internal reasons for considering changing careers, and that is completely fine. Doesn't matter what's going on in the rest of the world, right? I wanted to take a look at a couple of career paths, and I picked nursing and education, partially because I'm fairly familiar with those things, but also because I find they're very common for people who are perhaps like yourselves, thinking about making a career change or continuing their education as an adult. So I wanted to look at those two career paths and a couple of different levels that you might enter in and or end up at in those careers. Now, nursing assistant is an entry-level job in healthcare. And I'm going to tell you the story of a good friend of mine who really did go through all of these steps. Okay, so she started actually as a midwife. She had some college under her belt, but she became a midwife. That means she was helping expectant mothers work themselves through the birth process and the neonatal care that they needed. That was something she needed some college for. It is roughly the equivalent of being a nursing assistant at a facility. What do nursing assistants do? They help patients with activities like eating and bathing. They transport patients and clean their treatment areas. They don't all work in facilities, right? They might also work in, like I said, birthing centers or in home health care or in senior living facilities, things that allow them to work directly with patients. It is a medical field. It is not a registered nurse. Is not a nurse practitioner, okay? The projected growth rate for this career is roughly average. We saw that means about 7-8%, and the median pay for that job is about $30,000 to $40,000 a year. So if you went to the Bureau of Labor Statistics site we looked at a second ago, that's what you would find. That's where I got this information, okay? So if you're thinking about going into a nursing career right now, that might be a good place to start. Contrast that with a nurse practitioner or a registered nurse. These are going to serve as primary healthcare providers. So if you go to the doctor's office, if you take your kid to the pediatrician's office and you meet with a single person, that often is the nurse practitioner. That is a primary healthcare provider. That person can order diagnostic tests and lab work, diagnose and treat common conditions, and even prescribe medications. As you might imagine, that requires a higher level of education. In fact, you need a master's degree to be in this part of the nursing profession. Note there that the job growth rate over the next 10 years is much faster than average, and the median pay is significantly higher. So if you think back to the questions that Sarah was asking you a few minutes ago, does the incurred cost of doing something like going back to school to complete my bachelor's and then moving on to a master's, is that $80,000 median pay going to pay for that, and how long is it going to take to do that? Again, we're not here to tell you whether the answer to that is yes or no, but we are here to tell you those are the kinds of questions you should be asking yourself as you work through this. And you can go higher. So my friend who was a nursing assistant, a midwife, went back and completed her degree and has been working for several years as a nurse practitioner, and now has gone back to college for a third time. She's becoming a nurse anesthetist. This is somebody who administers anesthesia and provides care before and during and after surgery. So not performing the surgery, there's no scalpel in her hand, but she is present in the operating room, consulting with the doctors, consulting directly with patients, and in some cases providing primary care and emergency services. Note, this is also a master's level degree, although my friend is actually pursuing a doctorate, not an MD, but a doctorate in this field. The growth rate on this one is much faster than average, which I'm guessing influenced her decision. There are a lot of likely job openings coming up in this area, and the median pay is substantial. Now we're talking about 3 times the nurse assistant salary. So again, the nurse practitioner pays about twice as well as the nursing assistant. The nurse anesthetist pays about 3 times as well as the nursing assistant, but you need significantly more years in college to get there. So what you should be thinking about, and regardless of whether you're currently considering nursing or anything in the medical field, what you should be thinking about are a lot of those same questions. How long will it take me to get there? What will the increase in pay be? And how well does it fit my personal goals to get it to each of these levels? Looking at a similar profession that's near and dear to my heart, education. And so a similar path in education to what we just saw in nursing might be to start with it as a teaching assistant, or in some districts it's called a paraprofessional. What do? Well, they work with students to support instruction. They enforce class rules, monitor behavior, take attendance, enter grades, all the administrative tasks that the classroom teacher might not have time to do because they're so busy working with students, or worse, might have to stop working with students in order to take time to do. A teaching assistant can take care of those so that the teacher can dedicate more time to direct instruction. In short, they support the teacher of record throughout the school day. A lot like the nursing assistant, a teaching assistant is going to require some college. You need to be credentialed in this area, but it's not nearly as rigorous as becoming a full-fledged teacher. The growth rate for this career is roughly average over the next 10 years, and it pays about $30,000 as of right now. So file that away. Now imagine that teacher that the assistant is supporting. And I picked elementary, but most of what I'm going to say is going to apply to high school teachers and middle school teachers as well. An elementary school teacher teaches kids kindergarten through 6th. They're going to utilize instructional strategies that they learned in their bachelor's degree program, and of course are constantly having reinforced by the school or district that they work for. They're going to design lessons and utilize resources based on state standards, district requirements, and so forth and so forth. Note that the median pay here is about double, $60,000 to $80,000 for an elementary school teacher. Now, personal commentary, there's no such thing in the world as a teacher who's not underpaid, right? But certainly this is a higher paying position, as it should be, of course, because it required more credentials to get there than the one we looked at just a second ago. Now, I mentioned that the elementary school teacher is implementing strategies they learned in their bachelor's program. Well, they learned that from an education professor. There are a lot of paths that you might take if you're an educator. You could become a principal and work towards being a superintendent if you work in a district, or a head of school if you work in a private school. But another option is to actually go back and teach at a university and help others become elementary and secondary school teachers. So your job, if you are a professor, is to prepare teachers to do the things we just talked about. You're not only going to be telling them about standards that they have to meet as a teacher, you might actually be helping design those standards. Professors do a lot more than just teach in the classroom. They keep up with scholarly research, they publish, they are influential in their field in a wide variety of ways. As I'm sure you know, in order to be a university professor, you will need a doctoral degree or a professional degree. So this is even higher than a master's. The job growth rate for this profession is about national average. And hang on. The median pay for an education professor, and I was surprised by this too, isn't different. Again, this is median. There are a lot of exceptions on both ends. But the median pay is roughly the same as being an elementary school teacher, the people you're preparing. Now, it's a lot harder to get this job. And it's a very, very different job. Instead of working with a bunch of little kids, you're working with a class of adults, right? But the pay is the same, roughly, on average, right? So becoming an education professor might be a goal of yours if you're in the education field, but it might not be the money that's driving you to that decision, okay? So I just wanted to take a look at a couple of careers just to give you some context for what it might be like to think about not just what am I going to do next, but what path does that set me on for the future. Now, to conclude my section here, I want to take a look at some very specific examples of some people that might be hitting a career crossroads, as you may be as we speak, okay? So let's take a look at Chris. After a company shakeup, the department that Chris has led for 20 years in his company was eliminated. Now, he wasn't let go, but his career is at a crossroads. A company vice president offers him a job leading a different department, but it's at a reduced salary, and not just because of the restructure, but because Chris doesn't have a college degree. What are some options you might recommend for Chris? Now, before I reveal the answer choices here, that's my test prep background talking, there's no right or wrong here, but I want you to think about which of these resonates with you if you happen to be familiar with a situation like Chris's. Chris could take some time off, go back to school full time, complete a degree, and then re-enter the workforce with those credentials he currently lacks. Chris could also take that offer that the VP made. He could get through this rough patch. Remember, he was just told that he is going to have to take a job change. That's a big change. Maybe that's a lot, and he doesn't need to be now also going back to school. Don't go back to school yet. Get through this before making your next big decision is another option. Chris might feel that he has reached his ceiling in this particular company, and it's time to think about looking for jobs at another company or even another industry that he's already qualified for. Or Chris could start his own business. Chris could say, look, I've got all the experience I need to run a business. I just don't have the piece of paper that says I can advance in a larger company. So I'm going to start one of my own. And maybe you can think of a fifth option that Chris hasn't yet thought of. But regardless of what you personally feel, understand you have options and you're not going to be wrong. You're going to make the decision that's right for you personally. What about Damian? He's got a dilemma too. Damian dreamed of being a doctor, but he started a family right around age 20, and he didn't finish college or attend medical school like he originally planned. He currently works as a shift supervisor at a local medical facility, which means he's in the right field, right? His kids have now grown. They're in middle school now, and he feels he may have some time to refocus on his career because they do not require 24/7 supervision anymore. What are some options you might recommend for Damian? He too, you'll notice the similarity of the options, right? He could take some time off work, go back to school, complete a bachelor's, and then he could go ahead and apply to medical school like he always dreamed. He could also keep his job, go to school part-time in a bachelor's completion program, and worry about applying to medical school down the line. It'll take him a little longer to do it that way, but it's a viable option. Or he could keep waiting until his kids have finished high school. That is a very personal thing for a parent, deciding whether to add more to your plate before your kids are out of the house is a very important and very difficult decision for a lot of parents. But that is an option Damian has. Maybe when his kids are ready to go to college, he will too. Or maybe he has another option that I have not listed here. Remember, there's no wrong answers. And then let's think about Claire. Claire faces a conundrum too. Now, unlike Chris and Damian, Claire actually didn't attend college. She needed to support her parents and siblings by taking a job as soon as she graduated high school. She's been doing that for about 5 years, and she's got a pretty good job working as an executive assistant in a mid-sized accounting firm, but she's always dreamed about being in advertising. So what are some options that Claire might consider? Guess what? She too could take some time off work to go back to school, complete a bachelor's in her chosen field of advertising, and then re-enter the workforce with those additional credentials. She could keep her job. She's got a decent one, right? And she could continue to build her professional network and try to find a better opportunity on the path she's already on. Or she could start looking for comparable jobs just in the industry she's more excited about. All viable options. And again, maybe you've thought of another one that I didn't even think to put down. Claire has choices, just like all of you have choices. And I see that there's over 30 of you in the room. I'm guessing there's over 30 different answer combinations to the various questions that we've been asking. That is completely okay, and as it should be. So as a quick reflection on what I've been talking about and also what Sarah showed you, I want you to go back and repeat these exercises. So look at that Bureau of Labor Statistics page. Think about the scenarios you just looked at with Chris and Damian and Claire, and ask yourself some of the key questions that Sarah mentioned earlier. Now you might have some additional understanding and context for what those questions mean. Things like, how long will it take for the pay increase I get down the line to pay off the increased school costs in the short term? If I'm attracted to that higher level job, is that because I know it pays better? Okay, that's a good reason. How much more though? And maybe I'm attracted to the higher level job for a very different reason. Maybe it's just what I've always dreamed of. Maybe it fits my skill set perfectly. Maybe it's what I'm really passionate about, like teaching or taking care of people. Or maybe I'm attracted to some of those lower level versions of the jobs we just looked at, which is equally great. Is that because it looks more attainable, or I've always just sort of assumed I would have to take the lower level path because I'm an adult and I don't have time? But as Sarah showed us earlier, that's one of our myths, right? We don't necessarily have to think of ourselves as behind just because we're adults. Is that lower level job really that much more attainable, or could you realistically also reach some of those higher level ones as well? And then finally, if I do go into the lower level job as I switch industries, maybe that's just a transition to one of the higher ones, right? The job you take next and the path you follow next very likely will not be the end of your story. So you want to take a look at it from that perspective as well. Maybe taking that teaching assistant job will get you the contacts that you need to become a full-time teacher down the line. Maybe taking that job in that advertising firm, even though you don't have a lot of advertising experience, will get you the experience you're looking for so that you can apply the skills you already have to something that you're more excited about. Now, everything we've talked about so far, more or less, is about making the decision about whether to go back to college. So the last thing I want you to start thinking about is, okay, for those of you who have looked at this and thought through this and listened to us today, and I appreciate you doing that, and are now even more sure, you know what? College is the right decision for me. The next big thing you have to do is figure out where, right? And what I'm going to show you is another search engine. This one is sponsored by the College Board. You might remember the College Board from your high school days. They make the AP tests and the SAT. They're also an enormous organization of colleges and universities that sets admission standards and does a whole wide variety of other things. What they also have is a really cool college search engine. Now, that's a pretty long URL. It's not quite as easy to memorize as bls.gov, but if you just go to College Board, Big Future will be one of the easiest things to find on their page, okay? So either write down that URL or just go to collegeboard.org and find the Big Future links. And here's what you will find. This is what the main page looks like. Now, you could just enter the name of a college because you know you want to go there, but since you're probably still in the research phase, you might search by location. Now, let's say I live in Alabama, but I've always dreamed about living in the mountains. So I'm going to enter Colorado as a possible state. California's got some beautiful territory. North Carolina's got some beautiful hilly territory. I'm going to leave Alabama in there just in case I decide to stay close to home. Now I've narrowed down the thousands of potential colleges to about 360. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't have time to look at 360 schools in great depth. So I'm going to enter another search criteria. In this case, I'm going to choose the field of, here we go again, nursing. I'm going to pick general for now, because that's the easiest way to search for me at this stage. And look, I just cut my results by more than half. Remember, I'm still in those 4 states and I picked nursing. Now I'm going to narrow it down further. Schools with a 4-year degree. Look at all these options. Do I need to consider any of those? Distance learning might be important for me. So I click that and I'm down to 75 results. Still too many to go through all in great detail. So I'm going to do one more thing. I'm going to narrow it down to middle-sized schools that are in or near a pretty decent-sized city. And again, for you, you may choose any of these additional checkboxes that apply to you. For me, I just got down to 18 results by simply saying I wanted a medium-sized school in one of those 4 states with a nursing program that offers distance learning. All right, so I'm going to hand it back to Sarah. Again, that site was the collegeboard.org, their Big Future webpage. If you're still in the process of writing that down, I hope these 2 big search engines I've shown you have been helpful to you. I hope you get to utilize those. And I'm going to hand it back to Sarah to wrap us up today.
Thank you, Henry. That was great information about research and resources and practical walkthrough of some scenarios that'll help us implement those questions that we should be asking as we make this decision. So helpful. Before we send things back to Maxine to open it up for questions, I want to quickly share with you the dates of those remaining sessions in the series. Join us again in September for our look at college admissions and the college experience. And then we'll be back in October to talk about life after college. And you can find recordings of previous webinars and keep up with future offerings on our social media pages, which are shown here. Thank you so much for joining us today, Maxine. I will hand it back over to you.
Yeah, thank you so much for that presentation, guys. It was really helpful. And just before we get to the questions, which again, if anybody does have any questions or want to go over any of the information that was provided in this webinar, you can submit that into the question box and we'll get right to that. But there will be a follow-up email that will also link out to the recordings, as well as some of the upcoming webinars. So you'll be able to access all of that there. So while we're waiting on questions to come in, I saw, Sarah, in one of the earlier slides, you were talking about the myth of, am I too old to go back to school? And I was kind of wondering about the inverse. Because
Mm,
sometimes in talking to some of my friends, I know that there's a worry like, I'm too young to go back to school. I just graduated a couple of years ago and I'm getting my professional life in order, but I really want to maybe change fields or get an extra, not necessarily accreditation, but an extra title, like a master's or something in my field. So what do you have to
mhm.
say, or what kind of advice do you have for those situations?
That's a great question. I would say that the only thing that would limit, that I would consider limiting you on the young end of the scale would be maturity. If you don't have the personal maturity to commit to school and to actually see it through, then you probably shouldn't bother. Wait until you're ready to do that. But if you are ready, and you know, plenty of people are ready at 18, some aren't ready until they're 30, some aren't ready till they're 50 because of life events or maturity or whatever it might be, then just I would consider that in your picture.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you so much for that. We also got another question, and this one might be more towards Henry, though, Sarah, if you have any information, by all means. But do you have any websites to help determine a career path?
So, in terms of helping you identify one, oddly, I wouldn't necessarily go to a career site. I might do a personality inventory. If you're familiar with things like the Enneagram or something like that, um, that a lot of those are gears towards. There's a really good book I have called Now Discover Your Strengths. Um, and I said earlier, I'm a big believer in beginning with the end in mind. But that said, it's tough to look at something like the Bureau of Labor Statistics page and say, all right, I'm just going to research a bunch of careers and see which one sounds good, right? A better move, a better way to get there, if you're not sure yet what you're interested in, is to think about who you are as a person and what you enjoy doing. And I don't mean what field you enjoy working in as much as what you literally would imagine having a good time doing with your days. Am I detail oriented, or am I more of a big picture person? Am I kind of chill? Like I work I work well in an environment where everybody has a lot of personal flexibility and freedom to do things their own way, or do I need greater structure than that? So you saw earlier when we were looking at the accounting job, it works well for people who are very detail oriented, who work well to deadlines and things like that. So if you start thinking about who you are as a person and what your personal strengths are, then you can use some of those inventories to say, so what careers actually would match that? And I would really encourage you to do that rather than do kind of the reverse, where you just sort of poke around looking at careers and seeing whether they resonate with you. Do a little bit of work on yourself first, and think about what kinds of activities and how you like to spend your time and what kind of environment you would enjoy working in, and then see what careers match that.
Awesome. Super helpful. I don't think we have any other questions coming in. I'll leave the floor open for another couple of minutes. But again, I did really want to thank you, both Sarah and Henry, for joining us today, for presenting all of this really great information and fantastic resources that you were able to share with us. And again, there will be some more upcoming webinars, as Sarah mentioned, so feel free to sign up for those, and we'd love to have you there. Otherwise, we'll leave the floor open for a couple of minutes, but thanks so much.